Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome. This evening, many strong explosions lit the Green Zone, which includes the coalition headquarters in Baghdad. Smoke was seen rising from the area. Eyewitnesses said that the light may have been caused by mortar shells amidst a wave of attacks against the coalition headquarters, which Baghdad has experienced in the last 10 days. 4 people, among them 2 policemen, were killed, and 9 people were injured in a bomb explosion in the center of Basra in the south. Meanwhile, a bomb exploded outside the Iraqi court in Baghdad, damaging cars near the building, injuring many prisoners and 2 Iraqi policemen. One of the explosions was so powerful it left a crater 2 feet deep in the sidewalk and shattered the windows of the prison, housing prisoners who were transferred from Abu Ghraib, the largest prison on the western side of Baghdad, for people accused of murder and theft. The Saudi Majalla newspaper confirmed receiving a message from the Al-Qaeda network, claiming responsibility for the recent attack in Riyadh. The message indicates that they will carry out similar attacks against U.S. interests during the month of Ramadan. Meanwhile, the Saudi authorities arrested a number of people suspected of being linked to the Muhayya residential complex explosion in Riyadh, killing 18 people and wounding 122 others. Saudi King Fahd bin Abdulaziz vowed to deal with those responsible for the attack with an iron fist. In a statement released by the Saudi cabinet, the Saudi king was quoted saying that terrorism must be confronted, and anyone who threatens the kingdom's security or stability will be stopped by force. Iran's President Mohammad Khatami denies that his country is producing uranium and plutonium, reiterating that reports on this issue are incorrect, saying that the production of plutonium requires certain capabilities currently unavailable to Iran, adding that Iran was able to enrich small amounts of uranium as they disclosed, and as stated by the International Atomic Energy Agency. His statements came after the International Atomic Energy Agency released a report accusing Iran of violating international nuclear agreements by secretly producing plutonium and enriching uranium. However, there is no evidence that Tehran is trying to make an atomic bomb. Amid arguments on their nuclear activity, Washington is opening new channels to criticize Iran. The U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell strongly criticized the Iranian Authority, adding that the Iranian people want to be free.
The stand the United States is taking on Iran is now clear. The American administration is not giving the Iranian government a chance to catch its breath, focusing on 2 issues: Iran's internal political situation and the nuclear issue, choosing the right time to bring up each of the issues. This time, the U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell chose to criticize Iran's internal situation.
The Iranian people want their freedom.
The Iranian people want their freedom back. They do not want to banish Islam from their lives. Far from it. They want to be free of those who have dragged the sacred garments of Islam into the political gutter.
One of the people Colin Powell is talking about is Hassan Rouhani, head of Iran's National Security Council. It is clear that the position of the Russian President Vladimir Putin towards the Iranian authorities is different than that of the American administration.
Iran is a full-fledged participant of the world community and has all the right to develop its nuclear programs in accordance with certain international rules.
Iran is aware that the special interests of the United States and Russia determine their position towards it. Russia offered to build an $800 million nuclear facility. However, Iran knows that currently the balance of power is on the American side, thus making calculated sacrifices in order to stop the American administration from making excuses.
Iran wants to exclude all worries and concerns regarding its nuclear program, and Iran wants to carry out its nuclear program in accordance with international laws.
However, this is not sufficient enough for the IAEA to release a positive report on Iran's nuclear policies. Washington's use of the nuclear card to put pressure on the Iranian government will not stop unless the IAEA releases a positive report.
Arab League Secretary General Amr Moussa urged the United States on Tuesday to stop siding with Israel in its conflict with the Palestinians. Speaking to reporters after talks with visiting U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Richard Armitage in Cairo, Moussa also said the situation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict will remain blocked until the United States resumes its role as an honest broker.
I believe that he and all the American officials do understand the seriousness, the extreme seriousness of the situation, and that nobody is going to buy some nice words or to keep silent and sit tight while the situation deteriorates as it is. This is our point of view, and I believe they know it, not only Mr. Armitage, but all of them. For them to act, and to act in a positive way, in a meaningful way, not just to act to say that we urge Israel to, or we call upon Israel like the resolutions of the General Assembly. This is the United States, not the UNGA. If they do criticize the UNGA for a resolution, they shouldn't. The American policy has to take a serious line, a practical line, not call upon and urge and invite. That doesn't work with the Israelis in their current mood under the present government. So we hope that the U.S. will take a line of policy that would save the situation, not only the situation in the region, but their own interests.
Moussa also told Armitage of Arab concerns over the situation in Iraq, stressing that as long as there is an occupation, there will be resistance, whether in Iraq or in Palestine. For his part, Armitage said the U.S. support for Israel is something that is a bedrock principle of the United States. However, he said that this does not mean that they support every action the government of Israel takes, recalling U.S. criticism of targeted killings of Palestinian activists. Armitage was returning to Washington later in the day after completing a 4-day tour that has taken him to Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon said on Tuesday that he had issued orders to the army to ease the pressure on Palestinians living in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. He made the announcement at a joint press conference with visiting Slovak counterpart Mikolas Zorinda. Earlier in the day, Sharon was quoted as saying that Israel must ease the closure or risk provoking the collapse of the Palestinian National Authority, which would force Israel to take administrative responsibility for 3.7 million Palestinians. The Israeli Prime Minister spoke ahead of the expected investiture of his Palestinian counterpart Ahmed Al-Qreya's government at a parliamentary session on Wednesday. Qreya is expected to present his program to a session of the Palestinian Legislative Council in the West Bank town of Ramallah and puts his 24-member cabinet up for a vote of confidence. Moving to the Iraqi file, several explosions were heard around the Iraqi capital Baghdad on Tuesday night, as smoke was seen rising from the headquarters of the American-led coalition Saddam Hussein's former presidential palace. The blasts followed some 25 minutes after at least 3 other explosions which sounded like mortar fire. Earlier on Tuesday, 4 Iraqis were killed, including 2 policemen, and 9 people injured when a bomb exploded in the center of Basra. A police official said the blast had occurred when a roadside bomb blew up a civilian car and damaged 2 more cars. The head of the internal security forces in Iraq's southern capital said some of the injured are school children who used that road earlier in the morning to go to school. He blamed loyalists of ousted President Saddam Hussein for the attack. British forces cordoned off the area of the blast, which included at least 1 school.
Confirm that there's been an explosion at this location this morning. It happened at about 8 o'clock, approximately 8 o'clock local. Until we conclude our investigations, I'm unable to tell you anymore.
A second blast echoed over downtown Basra about midday, but it was not immediately known if there were further casualties. Meanwhile, the U.S. Army admitted on Tuesday that the U.S. Black Hawk helicopter downed on Friday in the northern Iraqi city of Tikrit was most likely shot by a rocket-propelled grenade. The top U.S. ground commander in Iraq said the RPG was apparently fired as the aircraft was landing. In another development, the U.S.-led coalition admitted on Tuesday that its soldiers had shot and killed a local Baghdad official in Sadr city. The U.S. military said in a statement that Mohammed Ghazi el-Kabi, the U.S.-appointed official for Sadr city, died from wounds on Sunday after troops shot him when he refused to follow security procedures for entering Sadr city's municipal building. The U.S. military added that an investigation had been launched. Sadr city, known as Saddam City under the former regime, was renamed for Muqtada Sadr's family of revered clerics when Americans entered the city in April.
We have not been able to establish definitively that they were Al-Qaeda members.
The U.S. decision to send 40,000 more soldiers from the reserves generated a lot of criticism from military experts and from the soldiers themselves. Many of them say it's wrong to send soldiers to the war front in Iraq without acquiring proper training beforehand. They have less than 4 days of training. One female soldier said that she only used weapons 2 or 3 times. She feels that she's not well prepared to serve in Iraq. Previously, the Pentagon announced plans to reduce the number of soldiers serving in Iraq from 130,000 to only 100,000 soldiers. There will be more reliance on soldiers from the reserves who will be regularly replaced.
In Washington, U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said that speeding up the training and the deployment of Iraqi forces does not mean that his country is searching for an exit plan. In a press conference, Rumsfeld announced that his country is discussing the possibility of sending international troops to serve in Iraq with 14 other countries, saying that countries must have political courage to send troops there. Last week, the Pentagon already announced a plan to reduce the number of U.S. forces in Iraq to 100,000 soldiers by next May. As instability and insecurity increases in Iraq, children are the most vulnerable to the war and its implications.
The children of Iraq who were orphaned by the war live on the streets of Baghdad. They spend their time searching piles of garbage for clothes to cover their bodies and for food to ease their hunger. The occupation soldiers kick them out from an abandoned area where they used to live.
They came in the first day. Many of them came especially to this place and kicked us out.
A few of these children were lucky to find a new home at an orphanage.
Since the war started, I've been living in the streets. Now I live here.
Between the ruins and iron bars, these children find an outlet to watch television or play games on the computer. Meanwhile, Australian soldiers sit on fancy furniture, forming a ring around a television set in one of the presidential palaces on the other side of the city. They are watching their home team's latest game.
It is an opportunity to get together and take a break from our routine security work.
This security is desperately needed, but it is not here yet.
Our country has no future as long as there is occupation.
The word future now means nothing to these people. They are expressing their feelings through images that hang on the walls.
occupation forces conducted massive Israeli aggressions across the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, razing land, demolishing homes, and expelling a Palestinian. The occupation forces expelled Kamal Idris to the Gaza Strip. He is one of the 17 Palestinian detainees facing expulsion.
26-year-old Kamal Idris was expelled from his homeland in the West Bank to the Gaza Strip. Israeli occupation forces on Monday expelled him, claiming he was involved in anti-occupation operations.
This procedure carried out by the Israeli army is an additional pressure on the Palestinian Authority. This deportation of people from place to place.
Idris was dropped off by soldiers in an isolated area near a main Gaza Strip junction. The Palestinian Center for Human Rights condemned the expulsion. It said the move violates international law and amounts to a war crime. Israel conducted other sorts of war crimes, demolishing Palestinian homes. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip town of Rafah sifted through the rubble of their demolished houses. In the West Bank, vandals suspected to be Israeli settlers with chainsaws razed an olive grove belonging to a Palestinian farmer at the height of the harvest season. Human rights groups say the attacks are part of an attempt to drive Palestinians off their land.
I have officially complained, but I have nothing left apart from the complaint. The paper is written on. I lost all my land and trees.
They uprooted thousands of trees belongs to the farmers in these villages and towns surrounding this settlement. The settlers, they are taking these measures in order to force the people to leave their lands. Palestinian people, they born here in along with the trees being found in this country, but the settlers, they are thinking that by uprooting the trees, they force Palestinians to leave their lands.
Palestinian officials say Israeli security forces are mostly turning a blind eye to such attacks by settlers and have done little to protect Palestinian civilians.
Hamas, meanwhile, denounced the expulsion of Mahmoud Idris, the demolition of houses, and the recurrent incursions into the Palestinian territories. The group said in a statement that Israel's continuous aggressions would not deter Palestinians from keeping up their resistance operations against the Israeli occupation. Hamas demanded a united Arab and Islamic stance that condemns Israel's criminal and terrorist actions against the Palestinian people. The United Nations Relief and Working Agency for Palestinians, UNRWA, said it will cut short its aid in the Palestinian territories due to the insufficient resources. The head of the agency, Peter Hansen, said the reduction will take place despite that every 6 Palestinians out of 10 live under the line of poverty. He added that the decision by the International Committee for the Red Cross to hold aid will make the situation much harder. And demonstrations took place in Gaza City, where hundreds of Palestinian women marched through the streets, protesting against the cessation of welfare funds from several Islamic institutions. After pressure from the U.S. and allegations of ties with terrorism, the Palestinian Authority froze the funds of the groups, waving banners saying, "Do not fight me through my food." The women, who rely on the money to feed their children, called on the resumption of the hardship funds. After the demonstration, many of the women marched onto the offices of Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Qraya. A UN report warned that Israel's separation wall in the West Bank will badly affect the lives of 680,000 Palestinians, that is 1/3 of the Palestinian population in the area. After surveying an Israeli map that outlines where the wall would cut through, the Human Affairs Coordination Bureau in the occupied Palestinian territories for the UN found out that the wall cuts off 14% of Palestinian territories from the rest of the West Bank. The Bureau added that the Israeli government did not consider the effect of the wall on the Palestinians. Palestinians will seek to put weeks of political wrangling behind them Wednesday at a session of parliament that should see Premier Ahmed Qraya and his enlarged cabinet finally sworn in. Qraya is expected to unveil the main elements of his government's program. He wanted candidate Nasser Youssef to take the post of Interior Minister, but then he dropped his demand, making way for Hakam Balawi, the close associate of Chairman Yasser Arafat. Officials predict that Qraya would flesh out plans to institute a mutual ceasefire with Israel, but others believe that Qaeda would fail to unveil a major change in direction from that of his predecessor, Mahmoud Abbas.
A report released by the United Nations confirmed that the apartheid wall, which Israel is building in the West Bank, will have grave humanitarian consequences to 680,000 Palestinians, which is about 1/3 of the Palestinian population. The United Nations Humanitarian Coordination Office in the occupied Palestinian territories said that according to an official Israeli map, the wall will isolate about 14.5% of the West Bank. According to the UN report, the wall will isolate an area that includes 122 Palestinian towns and villages inhabited by 274,000 Palestinians. Meanwhile, the former Norwegian Prime Minister, Kari Velocek, asserted that the dreadful wall that Israel is building in the occupied Palestinian lands must be stopped, saying that the wall is causing an economic and social catastrophe for the Palestinians. In a speech he gave in front of protesters in Oslo, Velocek condemned the Norwegian foreign policy towards Israel, saying that it's an escape from reality. Velocek was speaking about his country's decision to purchase Israeli-made weapons, saying that this purchase must stop because the weapons are manufactured in a country that violates international law and kills Palestinian civilians every day.
In a new Israeli incursion into Palestinian territories, one child was wounded and scores of citizens were arrested as hundreds demonstrated in the West Bank in protest against Israel's racist wall. More in the following report.
On the eve of the death of 3 Palestinians, including a child of wounds they sustained earlier, Israeli troops entered the city of Rafah, south of Gaza, supported by tanks and military bulldozers near the borders with Egypt, dredging wide areas of land. The Palestinian medical source in Rafah said a Palestinian youngster was seriously wounded when Israeli soldiers opened fire at him. This evening, Israeli soldiers entered the city of Nablus and laid a siege on one of the buildings. At dawn today, Israeli occupation troops broke into Ramallah and conducted a wide inspection campaign, during which 7 Palestinians were arrested. In Dar el-Balah, Israeli army arrested 6 Palestinians after closing Salah ad-Din gate. Palestinian resistance men opened fire at Termit Israeli position near Rafah and threw hand grenades and detonated explosive charges against Israeli military patrols east of Rafah. Meanwhile, hundreds of Palestinian citizens and international activists took to the streets to condemn the racist wall of separation erected by the Israeli government on the Palestinian territories. Organizers said that the Palestinian farmers chose the anniversary of the collapse of Berlin's wall to begin their campaign and draw world attention to what is taking place in the Palestinian territories. Jamal Juma, one of the organizers, said that connecting the Berlin's wall with Israel's racist wall will make the campaign more effective in that it appeals more strongly to world opinion. In Qalqilia, hundreds of volunteers demonstrated carrying Palestinian flags and shouting slogans condemning the terrorist Israeli policy against the Palestinians. In Jenin, the Committee for Confronting the Wall issued a statement in which it stressed that Israeli bulldozers uprooted thousands of fruitful trees and demolished hundreds of commercial shops in the Palestinian villages of Nazlet Isa and At-Tiba in the West Bank.
Former U.S. Vice President Al Gore has emphasized that President George Bush's administration is restricting the freedom of the citizens and exploiting people's fear from terrorism to consolidate its political influence. Reuters quoted Al Gore as demanding of the U.S. administration to put an end to the policy of arbitrary arrests of the Americans. Chinese Vice Foreign Minister Dai Bingguo met South Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Yong-kwan in Seoul today as part of Beijing's efforts to arrange and host a fresh round of multinational talks aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions. We hope there will be a good harvest in the political field surrounding the North Korean nuclear issue, Yoon said. Dai also hoped for a good harvest in efforts to bring a peaceful settlement to the nuclear issue on the Korean peninsula next year. The first round of six-nation talks held in Beijing in August brought together the United States, China, the two Koreas, Japan and Russia. That meeting ended without setting a date for a new round. Sri Lanka's government announced today that face-to-face peace talks with the Tamil Tiger rebels have been indefinitely postponed. The announcement by Constitutional Affairs Minister J.L. Paris came hours before Norwegian peace envoys were expected to arrive in Colombo amid a continuing power struggle between Sri Lanka's President Chandrika Kamortango and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe over the peace process. But President Kumartunga said she would like to meet the Prime Minister to discuss a proposal to form a unity government together. In Japan, the three-party coalition led by Prime Minister Yonihiro Kawazumi's Liberal Democratic Party won yesterday's national election, holding a majority with 278 seats, or 58% of the 480-seat lower house of parliament. After his victory, Kawazumi said that he would immediately follow his campaign pledges to privatize money-losing public agencies and reform the tax system. Meanwhile, the new Conservative Party, which is one of the three parties in Japan's ruling coalition, announced today that it would merge with the Liberal Democrats, giving them a simple majority in the lower house of parliament. In Georgia, as protest outside the parliament building entered its second night amid opposition claims of fraud in November 2nd voting, Georgian President Edward Shevardnadze met opposition leaders last night in a bid to diffuse growing tension, but the talks ended in failure after he rejected their demand that he pronounce the elections invalid. The head of the national movement, who said earlier that the only thing to talk about with Shevardnadze was his resignation, emerged from the meeting saying he would urge protesters to continue their rally. With 20% of the vote counted from Guatemala's presidential election, which was held yesterday, the two frontrunners prepared for the possibility of a second round of voting next month. Former Guatemala City Mayor Oscar Berger had 47.6% of the vote, compared with 26.4% for center-left candidate Alvaro Colom. Retired General Efrain Rios Montt was trailing with 11.2%. Election officials said final results would be released on Tuesday. To have an outright victory, one candidate must receive more than 50% of the vote. Berger was inching towards that goal, but even he acknowledged a second round of voting on December 28th was likely.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin,